Welcome to the Book Fair podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have an interview with author Alan Gratz. There are updates for ongoing book ban news in Texas as well as Alberta, Canada, Hawaii libraries' restricted language around banned books during Banned Books Week, and the finalists for the National Book Awards have been released. We'll be looking at the titles that are up for recognition in the Young People's Literacy category. Let's start with an interview with Alan Gratz, author of War Games and Refugee. Good morning, Alan Gratz. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Anthony. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you start us off just by introducing yourself and the title that we'll be discussing today?
Sure. I'm Alan Gratz. I'm the author of 20 books for young readers, including Refugee and Ground Zero and 2 Degrees and Heroes. And the book we're going to be talking about today is War Games. It's my brand new book for this fall.
20 books for young readers. That's an insane amount of titles just in general. A lot of people don't have the good fortune to be able to release so much. What is it specifically about middle grade audiences that appeals to you?
Well, okay, so first, my last day job was as an 8th grade English teacher. And I'm also one of the rare people who actually really enjoyed my time in middle school. I know for a lot of people, it is the worst time that they had in school. I really loved it. But what I really love most about this age group is that they really are young adults. You know, we use that term young adult in fiction, like in selling books as for books for teenagers, but I like to think of this whole age group, middle school and high school, as young adults because they're still young when they go out to play at recess. They're playing kickball, they're horsing around, but when they come back into the classroom, they are adults, or at least they are working on being adults. They are trying to figure out their place in their community and the world at large. And I really hope that the books that I'm writing are books that will help them in that transition into adulthood.
And let's talk a little bit about War Games. What is this title about?
So War Games is a story of the 1936 Berlin Olympics. It's a story of a 13-year-old girl named Evie Harris who goes to Berlin to compete on the United States gymnastics team. And she goes to Berlin and everything is bright and shining and looks amazing. The Nazis appear to have made Germany great again, and everything looks great. And she knows that there were some boycott efforts to try and keep the American team from going to Germany because of what the Nazis were doing in Germany. This is, though, 3 years before World War II. So everything that they were doing, like, we didn't know the details behind everything. There were rumors and hints of what was happening, but not the details that we would learn later. And so she goes and she knows that there's been a lot of politics about this, but she doesn't want to worry about the politics. She just wants to go and compete as an athlete. And she begins to do that. But while she's there, the longer she stays in Berlin, the more she begins to see what's really happening behind the scenes, the darkness that is hidden by all the glitz and the glamour of the Olympics. And when she sees that, she wants to do something about it. And so she ends up joining an international team of athletes who are using all of their athletic skills to, while they're in town, rob the German National Bank and stick it to the Nazis. So it is a heist story mixed with a sports story.
And the phrase that you brought up about how Nazis have made Germany great again, art is inherently political, and it's really hard to hear a phrase like make Germany great again without tying it directly to the Make America Great Again movement.
Right.
Are you willing to speak a little bit about that connection and about what is so significant about these phrases in history?
Sure. I mean, anytime I write a book about history, I'm looking at the ways it connects to the present. And, you know, what we looked back at, when we look back at Nazi Germany, they were banning books, and we are seeing book banning on the rise in the United States. They were sweeping homeless people off the street and putting them in prison, and we're seeing sweeps of homeless people in major cities. They sent the German National Army into major cities in Germany in the name of helping to maintain order, something that may also feel very contemporary to modern readers. So there are a lot of echoes of what was happening back then in 1936 in Germany with what's happening now. It's not identical, and I'm not saying that anybody's a Nazi here now, but I am saying that if we're not wary, if we're not watching what's happening, then things may get out of control in the same way that they did in the 1930s and the 1940s. And so I'm always looking at history as a way of viewing what's happening in the present.
And similar to people who are maybe not so wary, Evie was not interested in politics, but there came a point in the story where she couldn't avoid it any longer. What exactly is the inciting incident that gets Evie involved in the political drama of War Games?
She starts to see hints of it here and there, but the real big thing that really puts her over the edge is she is assigned a youth services host. And this is one of the many kids who were assigned, each of the athletes had a kid assigned to them to help show them around Berlin, to take them to shop for souvenirs, or to take them to a place to get some food if they wanted to get them back and forth between the Olympic Village and their sporting arena. And these kids were boys and girls, but they had been pulled from the ranks of the Hitler Youth. And in fact, the kid that is assigned to Evie in the book is literally the poster boy for the Hitler Youth. He is like on the poster with Hitler, like recruiting kids to be in the Hitler Youth. And she is sure that everything she does is being reported back to the Gestapo through this kid. But as she gets to know him, she begins to learn a secret about him. He's actually Jewish, and he's been passing for Aryan so that he won't get caught. And he's been moved up the ranks of the Hitler Youth despite himself. He doesn't want that, but that's where he is and who he is. And so when she discovers his secret, she realizes how he and his family have been hiding and all the things that have been happening to the Jewish people in Germany behind the scenes. And it's getting to know him, and him now letting her in on all of the bad things that were happening in Germany before they cleaned it all up for the Olympics and all the fans and all the journalists to come in. That's when she sees what's really happening. And that's when she goes from being a person who can be okay with being there just to be an athlete to a person who can't just be okay with that and has to try and do something about it.
And it's fascinating that you bring up how Germany had to clean up in order to present the Olympics, because we are approaching the United States hosting the Olympics in a few years. And as you said, we're seeing some parallels. What are some of the things that Evie has seen throughout the story that you could maybe tell children to be on the lookout so that they can hopefully not buy into propaganda?
Right. Well, for one thing, getting homeless people off the street. And I'm all for finding homeless folks a place to live and a place of safety, but that isn't jail. And I think a lot of times in the past that's been where folks are taken, and just to make them quietly disappear. And there are other things like, just the taking away of rights. When people's rights are taken away in the name of safety, and we saw this post 9/11. Then it's hard to get those rights back. And I think that if we see the government go into cities that are host cities for the Olympics, for example, and say, well, we need to take away some of your rights so that we can clean things up and make things better for the world to see, it's very hard to get those back. So I think that's something that kids just have to be wary of. The Germans were banning and burning books, and we're not burning books yet, but we're banning them. So we've got to watch out for things like that happen in the name of safety. And that's one of the big things about book banning is they say, oh, we're doing it because we're trying to make reading safe for kids and to protect children. I think that we lose a lot of rights when we start talking about safety and protection.
And to provide a little bit more historical context, can you talk a little bit about what the Hitler Youth was for some younger audience members who may not be aware of that part of world history?
Sure. So one of the things that the Nazis realized right away when they took power was that they were going to have a hard time convincing adults to come over to their side, because the adults had already formed their own opinions about the world, and many of them didn't agree with the Nazi agenda. But what they could do is they could go and get kids before they had really developed their worldview. And so the Nazis took over the school systems. They fired all the teachers who were teaching real history and started to put their version of history in the classroom. Again, something that may sound somewhat familiar. And they made sure that these kids were brought up in with Nazi ideals. And part of that was the formation of the Hitler Youth, so that when you were, I think it was 10 years old, you were sort of obligated to join the Hitler Youth. If you didn't, it was noticed, and if you didn't, it was you missed out on opportunities in German society, and you were ostracized. So it was everybody just signed their kids up for the Hitler Youth, and these were they would get together and have Hitler Youth meetings where they would be indoctrinated into the Nazi propaganda. They would also be they go through a lot of physical trials. The Nazis believed that might made right, and so they taught the kids to fight each other and to box. And they taught them, they would go out on long runs to try and build up their strength. Basically, the Hitler Youth was a training ground for the German army to come in just a few years. And they actually used it as a way also of turning these kids against their parents. They would get the kids alone in the Hitler Youth meetings and say, hey, are your parents talking about Hitler in a bad way? Are they criticizing the government? Then tell your Hitler Youth leader and we'll get on that. And so you actually had a number of Hitler Youth kids turning in their own parents because they had been indoctrinated in these meetings.
And as a former middle school teacher, what are some of your insights into how young people work and their susceptibility to these kinds of indoctrination programs? In your time as a teacher, did you see that people were buying into negative images, negative stories? Like, did you see that they were buying into the negative side, like the Hitler Youth, or did you maybe see that American children were a little bit better equipped with handling that kind of indoctrination, or fighting against it, rather?
I think American kids are, I think they're very open to new ideas. And I think that's one of the things that's made America great, is that we are open to a lot of different ideas and don't all feel like we have to walk in lockstep with each other. A lot of kids are, of course, influenced by what their parents think, but they're beginning at this age to become their own person. And, you know, they are kids, but they're still thinking about how they're going to become, what they want to become as adults. And I think that it's those questions that they're asking that they ask them of their teachers, they ask them of their parents. They get questions answered in television, they get questions answered online, but they also get questions answered in books. And I hope that by writing these kind of books that I'm a part of that conversation that they have. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did, but at least by asking the same questions that they are, then maybe we can start a conversation with, my books can be in conversation with the kids. If they read the books with their parents, which I know a lot of kids do, they'll have a conversation with them. So mostly I hope that what happens is that rather than be indoctrinated one way or another, that they just learn to be people who question things and who are always asking questions and who are open-minded enough to make their own decisions.
And I think that segues perfectly into this next question I wanted to ask. Alan, do you have any insights on writing historical fiction, such as, is it difficult to insert fictional characters while avoiding detracting from the significance of the historical events that take place?
Yeah, so it's tough. I always want to balance who my fictional characters are and how much influence they have. And I also want to bring in actual characters, people from history. So, like, for example, in War Games, you've got Jesse Owens. He shows up and we see him. You've got Leni Riefenstahl, the infamous Nazi filmmaker, who shows up and is filming the Olympics. Hitler is there in the stands, right? So there are all these real people who are around. And I have to be really careful about the words that I put into their mouths. I have to make sure that what I have them saying kind of is what they would have said. If I don't have actual words from them, can I at least find something that they said and then adapt that in a way that works for my story? And then when I create fictional characters, I have to make sure that the fictional character that I'm dropping into this story isn't changing history, isn't doing something that would take history off the path that we know it. Because my books are used in schools a lot. And so I want to make sure that all the history in it is real in one of these books. I do have a lengthy author's note at the end where I talk about the decisions I made for the fictional characters and who I might have based those on, or what kind of experiences I might have based those characters on. And then the real life characters, the real life people who are in the book, who are characters in my book, I try to talk about who they really were and explain where I might have differed a little bit from who they really were. But for the most part, I'm trying to be as accurate to the history as possible. And it is a fine line to walk, but I love the puzzle piece aspect of that.
And I want to cover two last things before we run out of time here. Firstly, you have another book that's releasing, a graphic novel adaptation of one of your previous titles. Could you tell us a little bit about Refugee?
Sure. So Refugee, the prose novel, came out in 2017, and it is the story of 3 different kids in 3 different time periods in 3 different parts of the world who are all driven from their homes by violence and have to find a place of refuge for themselves and their families. And I wrote that book to shine a light on the refugee crisis in the world at present and in the past, and that if we don't change what we're doing right now, that tomorrow is going to be the same as yesterday. And I wrote that book, and it's been my biggest book. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 5 years. It's taught in schools around the country and around the world. And when we thought about turning one of my books into a graphic novel, this one jumped out and said, we got to do Refugee. So one of the things I was trying to do was give the statistics of history a name and a face. You know, I can tell you statistics like there were 900 Jewish refugees on the MS St. Louis in the 1930s. There 3 out of every 5 Cuban refugees died trying to make it to the United States aboard rafts in the 90s. I could tell you that in the Syrian civil war, 12 million Syrians have lost their homes, right? These are big numbers, they're important numbers, but until I give them a face and a name and make you care for that individual, those numbers might still be nebulous and not have as much meaning, right? So what better way to give an actual face to these characters than through a graphic novel? So now you don't just meet them and care for them, you see them on the page. And Sid Finney is the artist who did the book. His artwork is absolutely amazing. He brings all these characters to life, and their journeys seem so real. I was absolutely blown away every time I opened up the new pages that he was sending in as we got new chunks of them. I think kids are going to love this adaptation.
And lastly, just to give you the final closing thoughts of the interview, I like to ask all authors this same question to give a little bit of insight into what the creative process is for everybody and what their intents are, how they feel about their work. It's introspective, so please answer in any way that you feel is appropriate. Alan Gratz, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer?
You know, I feel like every time I start a book, I have a new theme. And like, for example, with War Games, my original theme was all that glitters isn't gold. I was playing on the gold of the Olympics and the way that Nazi Germany appeared to be great and was dark behind the scenes. I always start with a theme like that, and those themes end up in the books. But the funny thing is that by the time I've gone through revision after revision after revision, I always come back to one big overarching theme, and that is we're stronger when we work together. And I now see that as kind of the defining theme of my body of work, at least for all my historical fiction, but I think all of my books, period. And if that's my legacy as a writer, that I wrote books where the one overriding theme again and again and louder for the people at the back was we're stronger when we work together, I can live with that. That will be a very good legacy, I think, for me to have.
Thank you. That was an interview with Alan Gratz. His newest book, War Games, a novel of 1936 Berlin, and the graphic novel adaptation of his book, Refugee, with art by Sid Finney, are both available now. You can learn more about Alan and his work at alangratz.com. Next, we'll be looking at new releases out this week, but first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Fair podcast, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, favorite, or follow wherever you are currently listening. Second, you can follow the podcast on Blue Sky at BookFairPod or go to patreon.com/thebookfair. On the Patreon page, you can find episodes posted early as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. Lastly, the easiest way to help the podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Now, let's take a look at new releases, starting with Dragonborn by Struan Murray. This series opener centers on 12-year-old Alex Evans. 2 years after her father's death, Alex uncovers a secret her overprotective mother has been hiding: that Alex is a dragon, just like her dad. As she starts coming into her new powers, like fire breathing, an ancient dragon named Olifos whisks her away to a hidden place. This is the island of Skrala, one of the last dragon strongholds on Earth, where Alex will train among other young dragonlings. The story uses fun, familiar, magical school tropes that we all love, but at its heart, this is a deep story about grief, growth, and unexpected change. Alex immediately faces a major problem. Unlike her peers, she can't safely transform into her dragon form, putting her at risk as her combat training gets too brutal for her human body to handle. On top of that, Drake Midna, a legendary evil dragon who disappeared years ago, resurfaces. He's searching for a mystical artifact that could grant him unspeakable power, and Alex can't shake the feeling that she's somehow connected to his quest. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next is Invisible, the sort of true story of me and my hidden disease by David Soren. This is the story of J.J. Sugar, an 8-year-old who suddenly struggles to adapt to two big changes in his life. The first is a chronic illness, and the second is the arrival of a fantastical and totally unwelcome new roommate. When JJ is diagnosed with Crohn's disease, a 7-foot-tall creature suddenly manifests in the exam room. The monster, who wears a leather jacket and seems to only be visible to JJ, introduces himself as Norm, as in normal. Better get used to me, 'cause I'm the new norm. As JJ learns to manage his Crohn's, he also has to deal with Norm's unpredictable and disruptive presence. But JJ keeps the whole thing a secret from his friends. He fears that his diagnosis might completely change how they see and treat him. Meanwhile, JJ practices his art skills, with the big goal of moving to California one day to make animated movies. The book is narrated in a humorous first-person voice that follows JJ as he develops an understanding, but also of those living with other invisible diseases. The book offers realistic interpretations of JJ's experiences, giving readers insight into the challenges their peers might face, while also acting as a wonderful show of communal support for those already dealing with invisible illnesses. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next up is Kindred Dragons by Sarah Mensinga. This book merges the contemplative tone of Anne of Green Gables with the wonder and high stakes of accessible fantasy. And it's a beautifully warm solo debut written and illustrated by Sarah Mensinga. The story follows a strong-willed and creative young girl named Alice. She's been sent by her parents to live with her rather serious grandmother on Prince Edward Island. Longing for connection and completely captivated by old stories about dragons, Alice is absolutely delighted when she encounters an old reclusive dragon named Brim while exploring the nearby forest. When Brim suddenly falls ill, Alice decides she has to save him. She undertakes a solitary quest that leads her to discover more about her own unusual magical abilities. Alice learns she's a kindred, which is a human who can telepathically communicate with dragons. But her abilities set her apart even from other kindreds. Mensinga brings the story to life with gorgeous visuals. The dynamic paneling gives it a cinematic atmosphere, while soft line art and sprightly color palettes create truly evocative landscapes. What really makes this story stand out are the relationships. The connections between Alice and her grandmother are layered and complex. The grounded fantasy elements combine with these relationships to create a deeply relatable human story focused on loss, maturity, and self-discovery. This book is recommended for ages 10 to 13. And the last new release for this week, The Leaving Room by Amber McBride. This book follows a teen steward named Gospel, who is a keeper. Her entire existence is built around helping Leavers, the recently deceased, make peace with their deaths. As a keeper, Gospel has to follow a strict set of rules. Don't lie, don't enter another keeper's room, and most importantly, don't review the memories collected from Leavers. But Gospel struggles with these rules. Despite the mandate that keepers can't feel, we just are, we keep. Gospel secretly watches her Leavers' memories. She takes deep pride in her duties, preparing meals for the young spirits in her care, determined to ensure they find joy in whatever is next. She particularly becomes affected by two of her young charges, a 5-year-old Maple and 8-year-old Suvi, and then a beautiful and enchanting violinist named Melody, who is another keeper, enters Gospel's room. This encounter sparks a powerful new desire in Gospel, a desire to experience things far beyond her perceived purpose. Through quiet, philosophical, and sometimes eerie moments, McBride masterfully considers the liminal space between life and death, and the immense weight of grief and loss on children, particularly Black youth. The novel is rich with Southern Gothic imagery, pulling from Leaver's memories to create these incredibly textured settings, like haint blue ceilings and rocking chairs to sit, and watch giant willows weep. This book is recommended for ages 12 and up. Banned Books Week is over, but there is still more and more censorship news to cover. Let's take a look at some headlines, starting with the Helen Ruffin Reading Bowl in Georgia, blacklisting titles from the reading competition. The Helen Ruffin Reading Bowl is an annual event organized by Georgia educators with the goal of energizing young people and creating enthusiastic readers. Schools and libraries throughout Georgia encourage young readers to answer questions about books they've read. The quizzes are optional, and students elect whether to participate or not. Eligible titles in the Reading Bowl come from the Georgia Peach Book Award nominees, which are selected annually through a process in collaboration with schools and public libraries to select 20 finalists. Students then are invited to read and rate these books, allowing them to select the Georgia Peach Book Award winner, as well as honorable mentions. The nominees used for the book award are also used for the Helen Ruffin Reading Bowl. Though curiously, this year, 8 of the 20 titles from the nominee list are missing from the Reading Bowl site. The missing titles are Bright Red Fruit by Sophia Elhio, Crashing Into You by Rocky Callan, Not Like Other Girls by Meredith Adamo, Songlight by Moira Buffini, Thirsty by Jas Hommins, This Book Won't Burn by Samira Ahmed, Wander in the Dark by Jumada Emil, and When the World Tips Over by Jandy Nelson. The removal of these titles came after numerous complaints from members of the community for the organizers of the Reading Bowl to reconsider their inclusion based on concerns of their contents, which seem to align with other book censorship groups, targeting diverse authors, and in this case, primarily women. The concern this time comes from the choice to remove the titles that are up for literary recognition in the state that largely is decided by young readers. The Reading Bowl and the Georgia Peach Book Awards are statewide, and the Reading Bowl incentivizes students to read the titles that are nominated. Censorship advocates are essentially lessening the likelihood that some titles would be able to receive accolades based on personal beliefs. These titles are all written for and targeting young audiences. So it is curious for the committee behind the Helen Ruffin Reading Bowl program to bend to censorship. Young people in Georgia are pushing back, with Wheeler High School students launching a petition and demanding more transparency surrounding the decisions behind the scenes. A petition is available to sign at change.org. Hawaii libraries rebrand Banned Books Week to Freedom to Read. In acknowledgement of Banned Books Week, the Lihue Public Library set up their display featuring books targeted by censorship advocates, along with flyers produced by the American Library Association. All was business as usual until Monday, when a supervisor at the library branch took down half of the display, leaving only the books and a banner reading "Freedom to Read" intact. As the fight against censorship has grown in the last 5 years, new guidelines have been issued by the Hawaii State Public Library System that expressly prohibits the use of words like censorship, banned, and the phrase "Banned Books Week" in 51 public libraries across the state. Common decorations such as caution tape and images of flames in reference to burning books were also pulled from displays, as well as any slogans or literature provided by the ALA, who has sponsored Banned Books Week since its beginning. State Librarian Stacy Aldrich wanted to clarify, quote, "There are people who misunderstand banned books or believe that we are banning books." End quote. This language is consistent with people that misunderstand the point of Banned Books Week altogether. Literature related to titles on the display, as well as stickers, bookmarks, and flyers provided by the American Library Association, were all confiscated from the Lihue staff. Staff at the Lihue Public Library, as well as librarians across Hawaii, have reported the state's new restrictions to the ALA. On the Book Fair podcast, we support the freedom to read as a slogan and an initiative. However, attempting to expand the scope of Banned Books Week has ironically led to more censorship, with less information being readily available to patrons. While the Hawaii Public Library System had good intentions with the rebrand, it was unfortunately poorly executed by administrative staff. Next, some updates to previous stories, beginning with Leander ISD returning titles to classrooms after review for compliance with state law. Just last week, we covered the removal of 40 titles from Leander ISD shelves in Texas, and now 36 titles have been since returned to classrooms and libraries. Senate Bill 12, also called the Parental Bill of Rights, bans diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in K-12 schools across Texas, as well as teaching gender identity and sexual orientation. Among the list of 40 books pulled in the school district were classics such as The Devil's Arithmetic by Jane Yolen, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass. Mary Elizabeth Castle, Director of Government Relations for a group called Texas Values, which supported SB 12, believes that the decision from the district is an overcorrection, saying, quote, "Some of these books or classics, they actually help us understand a positive message of our country and how we can come together and correct wrongs and work together. Les Miserables is about the French Revolution, which actually inspires the American Revolution." End quote. There are still 4 books temporarily paused for instructional use due to unresolved concerns related to SB 12 requirements. These titles are Melissa by Alex Gino, which I covered for Banned Books Week recently, Stamped, Gracefully Grayson, and The 57 Bus. Next, we previously covered an initiative pushed through Alberta Public Schools in Canada, which led to a list of 200 titles being removed from libraries. While the administrative rule was rescinded almost immediately, there seems to be another push for censorship coming from St. Alberta Public Schools. While the previous attempt affected schools on a provincial level, this comes from a board of trustees for a single school district, though their focus is more explicitly discriminating against LGBTQ+ students and titles. Despite vocal opposition, St. Alberta Public voted to circulate draft policies that would implement several orders on sexually explicit materials. The policies include the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, which would restrict trans students from participating in girls' sports leagues. The Education Amendment Act would explicitly require staff not to refer to students 17 and under by a preferred name and pronouns without first notifying and receiving permission from the student's guardians. Similar laws in the United States have been frequently challenged for endangering LGBTQ+ minors who are potentially living with parents or guardians that do not affirm their identity. And the final policy would adopt the ministerial order that led to book bans in Edmonton. The order deals with explicit material, which, as is typical, is vaguely worded on purpose. Trustees for St. Alberta Public Schools have voiced their own opposition to the new policies, but acknowledge that they are required by law to enact them. Next, how many parents chose to opt their children out of LGBTQ+ materials in Florida schools? A recent civil suit from families and religious groups in Florida led to a new policy being implemented this school year that allows parents to opt out of inclusive titles as part of religious freedom. Several school districts have implemented systems that require parental opt-in or voluntary opt-outs, as well as letting parents determine how much access students can have to the school libraries. Information provided by school districts and compiled by the Florida Freedom to Read Project lays out just how unpopular book bans are, or at the very least, how much of a non-issue this all is. Flagler County was included in a criminal complaint against the inclusion of the book All Boys Aren't Blue. The district has roughly 13,000 students and implemented programs for parents to monitor or restrict student access to libraries within their schools on a 3-tier system. With 13,000 students, only 19 have been enrolled in the program, with 14 having the highest level, completely restricting them from checking out materials from the library. 5 students are enrolled in a lesser level of the program where the guardians can select specific titles that the students are not permitted to check out. Indian River County Schools has taken a more restrictive approach, requiring guardians to opt in to library usage rather than granting equal access and allowing guardians to choose to restrict access, which has led to only 23% of students currently having applications on file to check out materials. The libraries are still open to students, however, it is more of a burden for parents to fill out paperwork. There may be students with complicated living situations, or there may be a language barrier with their guardians. So, Indian River County has essentially chosen to restrict student access to libraries as a default. Osceola County Schools, with 60,000 students, currently have 4 students unable to access the library thanks to the new program, with 268 more, again out of 60,000 students, having access to the library with some restrictions set by parents. Polk County, one of Florida's largest school districts, has made access to 16 library books available on an opt-out basis, along with the 3-tiered system for total access to the library. With 110,000 students, 160 guardians chose to restrict library access, which comes out to 0.14% of the student body. After years of campaigning for censorship, battling with library funding, lawsuits, and more, how many parents are electing to use their rights to restrict student access to libraries? Discounting Indian River County, which made restriction the default, it's a couple of hundred in a state with roughly 3 million K-12 students enrolled in public schools. Closing out the podcast with a short story, the 2025 National Book Awards finalists have been announced. The full list of titles is available at nationalbook.org, but we'll be looking specifically at the finalists for the category for young people's literature. This comes straight from the website for the National Book Awards. Kyle Lukoff blends Jewish mythology and adventure in A World Worth Saving to share the story of a trans teen who sets off on a journey to save his friend, dismantle a conversion therapy program, and use his voice to stand up against bigotry and transphobia. In Amber McBride's novel in verse, The Leaving Room, a keeper named Gospel provides peaceful final moments for recently deceased young people, but is encouraged to push the boundaries of her leaving room when she falls in love with a fellow keeper. Told through the eyes of orphaned siblings that become educators to nomadic tribes and, along the way, resolve to help a Jewish boy hiding from Nazi spies, Daniel Nieri's The Teacher of Nomadland, a World War II story, uncovers a hidden World War II history and highlights the power of cross-cultural understanding. Hannah V. Sawyer's novel in verse, Truth Is, follows Truth Bangura, a 17-year-old poet who, after an abortion, finds community and freedom through her slam poetry team, her writing, and her post-graduation dreams. Ibi Zoboui's novel in verse, Skin, explores self-discovery, immigration, and colorism through the perspectives of Marisol, the 15-year-old daughter of a Sukoyant, or shape-shifting, skin-shedding witch, and Genevieve, the 17-year-old daughter of a college professor suffering from an unbearable skin condition. And those are the nominees for the National Book Awards for Young People's Literature. My name is Anthony, and if you'd like to learn more about any of the stories discussed today, you can go to patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is free. There are no posts hidden behind a paywall. If you'd like to show your support for the show, the best way is simply to share the Book Fair podcast with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.